formerly Chief of Staff at the U.S. Energy Department. It's a fool's game to predict or to forecast or to speculate where oil will be tomorrow or a week next Thursday. But I think it's useful if we understand the trend. Where do you see the trend?
Yeah, well, I think Matt Egan sort of spelled out, I think, a lot of the data. Really, this is, I think, a tale of two markets. We've got, the financial markets, the paper markets that are looking at this weak economic data, fears of a recession, bad economic data also out of China. And so they're pricing in, a recession and therefore lower demand, and that's why prices are coming back. On the other hand, you have, the official selling price set by Saudi Arabia and other key, producing countries. Those are rising. So the physical markets are quite tight still, but the paper markets are pricing in, bad economic data and future declining demand. But going forward, Richard, I mean, I have to say, the one thing you pointed out in your question to Matt, China reopening, which I assume will happen around the time of the People's Party Congress, that will put additional pressure on an already tight market.
Right.
You're going to increasingly, I think, have jet fuel demand come roaring back, I think, as well, especially with China reopening. That's been this kind of the missing part of demand returning to pre-COVID levels. When jet fuel returns, that's additional pressure. And there's a whole host of other factors this fall that I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. The unknown in all of this, well, it is the known in a sense, is OPEC. Because unlike most markets, here we are going to have the group of OPEC countries and the OPEC Plus sitting down and pretty much gerrymandering, if you will, where the price could go by supply and demand manipulation.
Well, look, OPEC Plus has a big say here, but I think it would be a mistake for us to assume that they're completely in control of this because, demand is back to pre-COVID levels, but supply is not. And the difference in the gap between supply and demand, half of that gap is I think everyone assumes it's OPEC or Saudi Arabia responsible for the whole gap. Really, half of the gap is from the U.S. producers that are not back to pre-COVID levels of production. And there's a whole host of reasons of why that is happening. But it's not all OPEC. I think it's a mistake for us to keep pointing the finger at OPEC and Gulf producers.
Would you expect OPEC, I mean, the deal that they came up with in terms of they basically borrowed oil from future. They didn't necessarily produce more. They borrowed from future quantities and brought it forward. Would you expect that to continue?
Well, look, the agreement is up in September, and they have a new Secretary General that just started, I think, today from Kuwait. And so they have a window of opportunity to make some changes here. My guess is they're obviously monitoring this economic data just like everybody else is. And I don't think they want to get too far in front of things. But at the same time, I think they recognize that there is a supply deficit and they want to be responsive. I do think you will see some additional supply coming, but it'll depend on, is this agreement going to be renewed? Or it will be a new agreement, or, a lot of times what they do, you probably know from covering a lot of OPEC meetings, is they'll just extend the current agreement to the end of the year. But then that means at the end of the year, there'll be another opportunity, another window to make changes. But I think we're in a supply deficit. I think everybody recognizes that now, despite falling prices now.
Is there the supply capacity that can be added? Because the one thing that the countries involved say is, look, it's not a question of just turning on the tap. We can't do it. Even Saudi has suggested that there are limits to how much extra could be produced.
That's right. I mean, spare capacity is the key question going forward. So you just can't add unlimited amounts. I mean, you sort of have to thread the needle here. You need to add some additional supply to meet demands and to keep prices, you know, at a smart level. But if you add too much production, that means spare capacity is growing towards zero, and then if there's a supply emergency, you don't have any cushion. And so by adding more supply could actually be bullish for prices.
Right. And that is that prices collapse. For whatever reason, you suddenly see excess capacity put into the market, demand falters or doesn't create, and prices drop. That's the big fear they have.
Well, look, I think I like to say that, you know, the IEF is the producer consumer organization of countries. You know, you have the IEA, that's the consumer group, and OPEC, of course, is the producer group. I think this is one area where both sides agree. High prices, nobody really wants high prices. I know the conventional wisdom is that the OPEC producers want high prices, but really they want healthy economies and healthy customers so that they can buy more. You know, the economies are growing so they can buy more of their products. So it's really not in anybody's interest for prices to be rising high. That said, we're not just in another energy boom and bust cycle here. We've made structural changes to supply in the name of, you know, decarbonization and climate and the energy transition before demand has been reduced. And so that's a structural change. Unless we address that, even if the war in Ukraine ends, we're going to see, not just for this year, but for the next several years, rising prices and a lot of volatility. And that's not good for anybody.
But we'll have you talking more about it in the future, sir. Grateful you came to us tonight. Thank you.
Great
West Means Business from New York. It is good to be back. There's cautious optimism after grain